Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Monday, June 3rd. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Akron game in 89 days, the game against Michigan in 180 days. The first big official visit weekend of the summer is in the books for Ohio State. They brought in some very, very big name players this weekend. Why are we not talking about that on today's show? Well, veterans of the recruiting process, let's say, are aware of the fact that there is a certain post-visit shine where a day or two after, you maybe get a better look at what the impact of those visits really were after the guys get home and kind of get back into normal life. So we're going to take another day or so and wait, and we'll talk about that stuff a little later on in the week. Today, we're going to be talking about something completely different with our buddy Tony Gerdeman of BuckeyeHuddle.com. Tony's been working through a series of profile stories on a bunch of young Buckeyes who could be taking on bigger roles with the team this year. We're going to talk about a few of those guys on today's show. You want more information on the recruiting weekend? Well, you can check out the Huddle Board presented by Jeff Ruby Steakhouse at BuckeyeHuddle.com for a bunch of that information. So, Tony, let's start with maybe the player that people are most excited about outside of Jeremiah Smith in the true freshman class, and that is quarterback Julian Sayin. He was very, very, very briefly a member of the Alabama Crimson Tide, signed with them, and then transferred over to Ohio State in January. Made a big impression this spring. How big of an impact do you think Julian Sayin could have on the Ohio State team this fall?
That's a loaded question, Tom, because if it's a big impact, that could be a terrible thing or certainly an interesting thing. But when you are there are only two freshmen that lost their black stripes in the spring, and Sayin was one of them. Lost it after his 12th practice, I believe. So, pretty quickly among even throughout the history of the program, the 12, 13 years that the black stripe has been here since Urban Meyer brought it in 2012. But in terms of the impact this year, and I think I posted this on the Huddle message board on Sunday, is that I don't expect him to start this year because there's some more experienced guys ahead of him. However, we have not seen enough from Will Howard or Devin Brown in this offense to think that, they can keep the job. Like, we haven't seen enough of them to think that they have this thing wrapped up. Even, whoever wins the job hasn't been here long enough or hasn't done enough to where for a fact that they're going to be able to handle it. So I expect one of those two guys to or both of those guys to take the majority of the snaps, but I'm not going to be shocked if we see Julian Sayin in some games this year. And, Devin Brown injury history, who knows what happens. We've seen the third string quarterback come into play before in recent history. So I don't expect him to have a huge impact, but the way they talk about him, if they had to turn to him, it doesn't sound like they would be terribly worried.
And you got to remember, of course, he just did come in January. So between now and the season, he has the opportunity to basically double or more the number of reps he's gotten in the offense before the season starts. I'm with you. I certainly don't expect him to start game one. I think that would take probably either something remarkably good for him or remarkably bad in terms of injury or play, quality of play from the other two guys who are, the more veteran guys in that room. But you can't tell me there's no chance he starts or no chance that he makes some kind of a material impact in something other than garbage time this year. So, yeah, he is definitely an interesting one to watch. Next up, another guy who is a very, very big name player, 5-star prospect in this class, who is not Jeremiah Smith, who is a wide receiver. And now everyone's kind of thinking, wait a minute, who? Oh, yes, Mylan Graham. That's right. Graham was not in for the spring, but he's coming in June. And now he's got an opportunity to potentially take on some kind of a role. Tony and I did basically an entire episode of the Buckeye Weekly podcast about Mylan Graham and what he might do this fall last week. So we want to hear a little more deep dive on Mylan Graham. You can find that in the Buckeye Weekly podcast feed. But Tony, Mylan Graham's another one where I don't expect him to be an immediate impact day one starter by any means. But if by the end of the year, I don't think you could tell me he's definitely not going to be an impact player for them.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. I think he has the ability to make an impact. Plus, when you consider that 3 members of the 4-member 2022 recruiting class are no longer here at Ohio State at receiver, one of the 4 2022 or 2023 signees is gone as well, and Noah Rogers. So there's 4 guys out of the picture that would normally be in the picture and creating a more difficult depth chart to traverse. And so now there's an easier, quote unquote, easier path relative to what it could have been for playing time. So Mylan Graham coming in June hurts him and hurts his ability to help right away, but it's a very long season. They're going to want to get him in there, when they can, and put him in good situations to succeed. They're not going to want to put him in situations that he can't handle, but you've got to get him in as early as possible so that if you do need him later on, it's not the first time he's out there.
Yeah, I definitely would not say there's a clear path to the playing field there, but this may be, with the number of guys that have left over the last couple of years, and as thin as that depth chart is at wide receiver, maybe you're going from running the Berkeley Marathon, which is the one that they run through the woods in North Carolina that only a handful of people have ever finished, to maybe running a regular marathon where it's not, no one's saying it's easy, but there is a way to potentially get there that more than one person might be able to do in a year. So, we'll see whether Mylan Graham can get there or not. But there is a path there for him to get to get on the depth chart. We on that Buckeye Weekly show we talked about maybe the Chris Olave path, where it's kind of a middle of the season, late season, you start making a little bit more of an impact. We will see if he follows that path or blazes his own. We will see. Next up, the other 3 guys we're talking about are true freshmen. But with offensive linemen, you always kind of have to build in 1 year where, your redshirt freshman year as an offensive lineman is really kind of essentially the equivalent of everyone else's true freshman year because there's so much development that goes in that position. So we're going to talk about a second-year player here, and that is Luke Montgomery. He's someone who came in with the recruiting pedigree. You saw him out there in some moments and some situations last year that were kind of okay. We talked about the Chris Olave path a minute ago, kind of the Donovan Jackson path, the Paris Johnson path, where you see guys out there situationally in it as a true freshman. Josh Fryer did it as well, kind of that same, the extra blocker, that Buffalo package. You saw enough of Luke Montgomery on that path last year, that it feels like he could be someone who, there's still some questions at that right guard position. Feels like Luke Montgomery could very well end up being the answer there.
Yeah, he played in 11 games last year. 9 of those games he saw snaps on offense, which is that's rare for a true freshman. And so when you're able to do that, it bodes well for the future. And then we saw him open up the spring at right guard this year. And so you're like, well, he's their first option there. We'll see if he can hold on to it. And he was there with the ones pretty much all throughout and, fluctuated in terms of who else got reps with the ones, but he was always there. And then in the spring game, I believe it was Carson Hinsman who got the start instead. So now there's clearly a competition there, and it's not just those 2. Taker Shabola is in there as well. But a guy that was getting his first work at guard. And remember, in high school, he was a tight end, a defensive end, and a tackle. And so this is like his real first work at guard. And what he said back in the spring is, you're doing this knowing that you're going to make mistakes. You're doing this to make mistakes so that you can learn from them and grow from them. So it wasn't a pretty spring for him, and it's never going to be. And you're going against Tyleik Williams, Ty Hamilton, dealing with some defensive ends here and there and some rushman packages and their 5-man fronts that they're doing. So they're throwing a lot at these guys. And so Luke Montgomery getting his first opportunity at guard, and you grow from it, you build from it. It's not going to be pretty. And then what happens in fall camp? You use those experiences from the spring to help you combat and compete for the job. And we'll see where he is, but a guy that has a ton of versatility. And like you said, back in the spring, he played tackle last year. And as you mentioned, some tight end. And I think the question was, do you feel kind of like, are you upset that you got moved to guard? He's like, I can play all 5 positions. I don't care where it is. I'll play wherever. And with his athleticism and his size, he's not the big, he's 6'4", 308, I think at this point. So not ideal tackle size, but also not too big to play other positions. So a guy that could be your 5th guy, could be a 6th or 7th guy, could be a swing guy in there and can play now pretty much any of the 4 positions because he'll have some experience there.
And is also someone who could play one position this year and a different position next year. That's something that we saw. I mentioned Paris Johnson earlier. Paris Johnson played guard when needed as a freshman, and then ended up moving out to moving out to tackle later in his career. So yeah, that is definitely a possibility as well. You may end up playing one spot now, one spot later, being all over this place this year. We'll see. They're still sorting out that offensive line to a certain degree. That's going to be one of the stories we were following quite closely over the summer and into fall camp. So we'll keep an eye on that one for you. Last up, we're going to talk about a running back, and I'm sure people are saying, aha, James Peoples. Aha, not so fast, my friends. You got to figure, the Ohio State, the path to the starting running back role, or a material number of carries at running back this year, not going to be quite so easy. This is kind of the opposite of the wide receiver room. Boy, the top of that Ohio State running back depth chart is robust. It's really just two names, Quinshon Judkins and Trey Henderson. But boy, those are guys who you're going to expect to get a lot of work and a lot of carries. So probably not going to be a real easy path to the running back to get a bunch of carries at running back. However, Tony, feels like Sam Williams-Dixon may have an opportunity to take the road less traveled to get onto the field this fall.
Well, yeah, I mean, you said it. There are two established guys at running back, and then it's Sam Williams-Dixon, James Peoples, both true freshmen, and redshirt sophomore walk-on TC Caffey. And those are your five guys. They'll also be losing carries to the quarterbacks, maybe 4, 5, 6 carries a game, something of that nature. So it's always been difficult for that third guy to get carries when there are no injuries involved. Now, Travion Henderson the last 2 years, there have been injuries involved. So that third guy gets moved up one spot closer. And when you're the second guy, you're going to be playing. And so you've got to get these guys prepared. Sam Williams-Dixon is, transferred from West Holmes High School, where he spent his first 3 years in Northeast Ohio, small school, small division, really lighting things up. I think he scored like 76 touchdowns in his last 2 years, as a sophomore and junior combined. And then transfers to Pickerington North, gets to play 5 games there, but opens the season with like 175 yards rushing against Cincinnati Elders. So you're wondering, like, can he go from small school to big school, I think Division I? And he did it pretty well, sharing the load with 3 other quality running backs at Pickerington North. But then, Ohio State's a much different picture. And I know we always talked about him being an all-purpose guy, a third down back, H-back type, where he can line up everywhere, anywhere, and really just a very good pass catcher. And so people might pigeonhole him. And I think what they need to understand is he's a running back first. That's what he is. And as I wrote this, maybe this weekend when I did a closer look at his high school highlights and things like that, just because he can catch the ball, don't penalize him and call him, label him as something other than a running back. You can call him an athlete, you can call him an all-purpose back. And as I mentioned, Ezekiel Elliott was the number 5 all-purpose back in his recruiting class in 2013. And he was every bit the workhorse that we've come to know.
Well, there you go. There are 4 names, young Buckeyes, who have a chance to play potentially a bigger role this fall, make an impact this fall, not necessarily starting, maybe starting, but not necessarily starting, but guys who might be playing a bigger role by the end of the year than they are right now. Guys who are going to be playing a big role this weekend, or this week, well, that's going to be all of us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. A very busy week. Got the fallout from the big recruiting weekend. Also got the start of summer camps at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. We're going to have the full crew out at the Woody this week, covering a couple camps on Wednesday and Thursday. We'll probably be talking about those on one of the upcoming shows here as we get ready for the start of summer camp season. Of course, all those visits as well. Lots of news, lots of stuff happening, and it's all happening this week at BuckeyeHuddle.com. That's where you can find Tony, Kevin, and I covering the team, Mark covering recruiting, our whole team of X's and O's gurus making you a smarter football fan, all at BuckeyeHuddle.com, and of course at YouTube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. That'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.